Thank you. Thank you all for enduring that. Right. AI, for me, is not just a tool. I think it's a cultural force. And that's despite the technological advances that are going on. There is something that remains constant, and that is the human. And this talk is about those humans and the cultures they inhabit. This discussion today centers around a book that I devoured in one sitting, one day about 9 months ago. And it's called Studying Those Who Study Us, an Anthropologist in the World of Artificial Intelligence. And it was written by this wonderful person, Dr. Diana Forsythe. She was an anthropologist, and she was working during the 80s and 90s for a period of around 8 years, observing labs in the United States that were working on AI technology. And these labs specialized in medical AI tools and software. So for example, they built things to help migraine sufferers. My question is for you today, in this talk, Never Neutral, how much has changed about the way we design our technology systems, our AI technology systems, 40-odd years later? That's what we're going to look into. We're going to talk about the following today, which is the implication of deleting the social when we build AI tools, or I'll tell you what that means. Speaking truth to power, the non-neutrality of technology, and the perceived problem of user acceptance, and finally, we're going to cover a lot today, how the diversity in the culture we create is really important to practically avoid any harms or anything like that, but also AI capabilities languishing on the shelf. Now, a note about anthropology. Thank you very much, Hannah, for introducing me. Sometimes people don't know what it is. My mum still asks me. So anthropology is not what Ross did from Friends. What does Ross do? He's a paleontologist. And it's not what Indiana Jones does. He is an archaeologist, right? And a dubious one at that. Indy, I hear the British Museum is still hiring. If you're interested, I think they like your methods. So anthropology is the study of the human experience. It's culture, it's community, it's our work, and how we also use the tools that we work with. So when you add tech into the mix, that becomes digital anthropology, sometimes known as techno-anthropology, which sounds really cool. It sounds a bit like a nightclub that you would go to. So I study how we use and live with technology from a cultural perspective. And if you're getting a bit itchy, you know, you're in an AI conference and you haven't seen enough Terminator pictures or any at all, I present to you an alternative. This is a film from the 1980s. It's an Indonesian film called Lady Terminator. It's brilliant, by the way. Really recommend if you can catch it. But what's really awesome about this is she starts off the film as an anthropologist before she turns into the Terminator. And it's got some really fantastic...
In this day and age, you speak of legends? I'm an anthropologist, huh?
That's how it's dubbed. That's the whole film. That's how she talks the whole film. It's brilliant. Watch it. So you've had your Terminator fix for today. And I know that if this AI anthropology malarkey doesn't work out, I've got options for another job. So back to Diana. So Diana was an award-winning anthropologist. She comes from Palo Alto. She comes from a long lineage of computer science pioneers. So her dad, George Forsythe, was one of the pioneers in computer science. He set up the first computer science department in Stanford. And her mother, Alexandra Forsythe, she actually created the first computer science textbooks. Now, Diana, in her book, goes on to talk a lot about how her family lineage really influenced her decision to be an anthropologist in this space. But particularly her mother, who experienced quite a lot of sexism when she was in academia. In fact, she wanted to do her PhD, just like her husband did. But the dean at the time said, actually, I don't really like female mathematicians, so I'm going to cut your funding. And so she couldn't continue. So she went to go work in a high school instead. She still managed to do the first textbooks and things like that, but sexism at the time meant that she couldn't do the same thing that her husband did. So that really inspired Diana when she was, creating this body of work that kind of was always in the back of her mind. But it wasn't just gender that she was concerned about having their voices kind of muted in the tech space. It was about anyone who might have their voices muted in the tech space, and that's kind of what I love this book for. So Diana saw her work as speaking truth to power. Now, during her life, she was really well respected by other anthropologists, but when she would speak to her peers in the AI lab, she was met with quite a lot of resistance and even sometimes disdain. Some people, she would ask feedback from these AI researchers about these papers, and they would literally turn around and not speak to her. As we will see as we go through this talk, perhaps if they paid just a little bit more attention to her observations that she was making, they would have made better AI capabilities. And a little bit about me. I am your time-traveling guide. I am Lianne Potter, I mentioned it, anthropologist as well. I'm here to put Diana's work in the context of AI development today, or even just tech development today as well. You can apply it to both, really. But I'm an anthropologist who can't resist being a technology builder as well. So I have been a software developer, a cybersecurity expert, and I'm now doing an MSc in AI and data science. Now, I would really love to just be a digital anthropologist, but nobody hires just digital anthropologists, really. So I have to have a bit of tech in me as well. So because of my background, I feel like I'll never really become part of the actual tech club as well, because I don't have that traditional computer science background. And Diana faced similar challenges. She was once told, those who can't code shouldn't be in this lab. And I think a lot of people in tech still feel this way today. And I think this is why Diana's observations that her lab workers deleted the social is still relevant today. But what does it mean to actually delete the social? And this was a key theory of hers. So humans are complex, layered with culture, history, and baggage, basically. We're all part of lots of different communities. We've got our close family, our extended family, friends, local and national communities, our work. So whenever we interact with anyone, we bring all that in to any interaction we have, and that's people and technology and tools, anything. And sometimes our cultural experiences align, and sometimes they don't, and that's the gravy of being a human. It's brilliant. And this can, however, affect when we're engaging with technology if it's not built right. And what's really interesting about anthropology is that anthropologists are really good at finding out what's not explicitly observed in culture. And this will have a very big impact. So any user researchers in the room will know that quite a lot of people will only tell you what they think they want you to hear when you're asking them a question about anything, and that's just very normal. So our beliefs and practices, therefore, don't always paint the clearest picture of reality when we're looking at human beings. And as I say, this is how anthropologists excel at. It's what we love. We're really nosy, is what I like to say that we are, really. We're really good at teasing out those nuances of fieldwork through things like participant observation and actively observing how people live and work. So to delete the social is pretty much to remove what makes us human out of the equation. Those creating the tools as well are also part of that social fabric, so their impact is significant even if they don't recognize it. So Diana explored how these researchers and assumptions were embedded into the tools they constructed, and when she asked them how they viewed their work, their answers were always really telling. So they were either doing AI or not doing AI. And to them, this was what was doing AI. So writing code, problem solving, building systems. This was doing AI. And when you get an anthropologist to look into it a little bit deeper, this is what they were actually doing. This is actually in order. So she wrote down everything they did over the space of a few years, of what actual work they were doing. So lab meetings, loads of meetings. We can all sympathize with this if anyone working. Loads of meetings, a bit of reading, a bit of research, admin. Oh, it's bane of everyone's life. But wait a minute, there's something missing. Writing code, building systems, solving problems. That was the very last task they did in terms of the kind of weighting of everything they did. So they were pretty selective with what they called work. I mean, pretty much all the social elements of work are neglected. Meetings is very social, Teaching is very social. So what does this omission mean for the technology they were building? Now, typically when you don't value something, like being social, you don't put effort into it, or tend to be kind of really bad at it as well. And this is no good for the very social tools that these engineers were building. So Diana did know, these engineers were shy and introverted, and one person even commented about these engineers being, not very good communicators. Now, we've all met technologists that are not very good communicators who prefer the tech to the people. But can you succeed in this field, building AI tools when you have poor communication. Now, Diana suggested that better communication probably would have prevented a lot of shelfware, and we'll go into what that means later, in these AI tools. So they saw their work as hard science. They were seeking universal truth, so anything outside of the scientific method wasn't valid for creating AI systems. So they focused on building quantifiable, codifiable, and testable systems. That's a very, very blinkered view. Technical problems to them should only have a technical solution. And the researchers she worked with did not see anything but coding and building the systems as legitimate AI work. So because of that, it's not a social problem, and therefore they can delete that social element out of it in their eyes. Because AI is something you do when you're working in front of a computer by yourself for hours on end. So as I say, anything outside of this hard science, all these disciplines here, is pseudo work to them. So, and that includes meetings and discussions. So all these disciplines, anthropology, psychology, philosophy, which we probably would now consider quite a lot more important today in AI, that was soft science, or even, at the worst, unscientific. There's no place for them in this lab that Diana was studying. And this made Diana's work incredibly challenging because despite being a very heavily educated doctor herself, her work was seen as lesser and lacked significance and impact to some of these researchers. So someone in the lab even went so far as to say that Diana was nothing but a dictaphone with legs, which I'm sure that made her feel really good about herself. Being an anthropologist in a technical space isn't easy, and I'm sorry to say it still isn't easy today. I've come across quite a lot of resistance myself. So how does viewing their work as a logical, scientific endeavor continue to delete the social? Well, it's twofold. So they fail to recognize that their work, by its very nature, most of it, is incredibly social, and that their work takes place in a social setting, the university, the institution. So their worldview is incredibly decontextualized and idealized. And they only saw that work in aspects that they enjoyed most. I mean, we're all guilty of that. That's not really a big issue on the base of things, but it's the ideal, not the reality. And it really affected their worldview, which in turn infected the product they created. Their approach erased the nuances of the human experience, which is crucial for making meaningful and impactful AI equipment. So if they don't value the social elements of their work, the question is, what is stopping them from deleting everyone else's social aspect of their work? Well, not much, and that is precisely what they did. So this is where we come to the thorny kind of conditions of power dynamics. So the researchers in these labs were mostly male, mostly white, from privileged backgrounds. So back in the 80s and 90s, these researchers called themselves knowledge engineers, and their aim was to duplicate human expertise. They thought knowledge was something you could extract. So it was like a mineral or a disease tooth that you could pull out and make machine readable. But how did this knowledge acquisition work? Well, without today's mountains of data, they kind of had to do all this manually. So they conducted face-to-face interviews. That's how they got their data collection. Now, that included a lot of location bias because it's easier to get people in who live kind of close to you. So they were getting data in from nearby people, and it was often lasted about 1 or 2 hours over a space of a fortnight, sometimes a couple of months, sometimes a couple of years, but not much. It usually involved a single person per system, one expert, usually a white man in power as well, whose expertise was taken at face value. So I could come in and say, I'm an expert in heart surgery. And they'd go, oh yeah, come in, come talk. Well, they won't take me, because obviously I'm a woman. But if I were a man, they would come and say, yeah, come in and tell me everything you know about heart surgery. And that's how it worked. That's how it worked for these AI systems that Diana observed, which is mental. So these researchers, the AI researchers viewed these individuals as you're either an expert or a novice, and again, erasing the nuances of experience there, because knowledge is highly situational. Knowledge is driven by unique perspectives. It's driven by any cultural interactions you have, your background. And we're all experts sometimes, and we're all novices sometimes, and that changes, that fluctuates. But the way these researchers elicited knowledge was like it was something, as I say, it could be accessible. And if it wasn't accessible, their kind of go-to was, let's be more direct with our questions. So Diana noted this, and she turned around and she said, I saw this knowledge engineer. Normally he's really dead nice and really friendly, but as soon as he starts doing these interviews, he gets right cold. So she asked him, why do you do this? And he said, well, it just seems like we're doing this technical task. There wasn't room for empathy. No room for empathy there. So the knowledge gathering process, so when they did get these people in, remember it's one person, and it was transactional. It wasn't collaborative. Medical question in, medical question out. And it was purely task orientated, and the expert's mind was there just to be mined. Forget all the social niceties. I just want everything you know about this heart surgery, for example. By and large, as you can imagine, they're probably not very good at doing interviews, and a lot of the interviewers didn't understand why they were being interviewed in such a way, and they often felt mistreated. Just give me a second for a quick Diet Coke break. So the engineers blamed the experts when they couldn't get the knowledge they wanted. These knowledge engineers failed to understand, though, that knowledge isn't universal. It's not rule-bound, like coding is, for example. Using cold, hard methodologies to gain this information is ineffective because nobody likes it, because humans aren't stable entities. We're really difficult to codify into absolutes. So thinking about that, the way data was created back then, think about how data is created now. So much of the data we get now is from the internet, scraped from there, and sorted and codified by others. And we know how reliable information on the internet is. And then we have to make a judgment call. I don't know if anyone's ever had, bothered to say, yes, that was a good answer, or that was a bad answer to any AI systems. But, we're the ones making those judgment calls, so we're kind of taking the role of the knowledge experts there. So these activities, like the one Diana observed and like the one I'm suggesting here, I think they delete the social, because it's making a judgment call about whose knowledge counts. And that creates a massive power dynamic. A small group of people deciding what is important for others to know is a form of power. And these knowledge engineers were aware of their power, but their end users were not. So when they finally got in front of people didn't realize actually it was just one expert or just a group of people working on this. It was invisible to them, as it is to us today. Everything's very black box for us today. And we don't know when we're interacting with these models if they are deleting the social until a scandal appears, like the one Amazon did, or many others. And I think power is at its most insidious when we can't see it, or challenge it, or even worse, when we think people are working in our best interests, but they're not. Because the knowledge engineers that Diana worked with viewed knowledge in absolutes, it meant that some people's perspectives were literally swept under the AI rug. And if you're wondering if any end users were involved into this design decision, they weren't. Heck, even nurses didn't count, apparently, for giving information about medical AI. They were well down in the pecking order. They're not going to be consulted. So it clearly shows that these researchers were making assumptions about the type of people that count in the build process. And in deleting the social this way, they deleted various cultures, races, classes, genders, and more. These voices were muted, and it posed ethical and practical issues as well. The use of power introduced loads of challenges in this, and we still grapple with that today. But they didn't really see their power as a problem. No, the problem why these AI tools that they were designing weren't working as well as they should was the problem of user acceptance, or the so-called problem of user acceptance, should I say. So, as I say, after the AI winter of the 1970s, these labs must have been absolutely buzzing because they had tons of money thrown at them and they were pretty much told, build whatever you want with no restrictions. They were living the dream. And it sounds perfect, but remember when I sort of said like they blame the expert if they couldn't get the answers they want out of them? Well, blaming the end user was a lot more a fun pastime for them. They loved doing this. Now, the reason why they saw them as a problem was because, and I kid you not, nobody was using any of these tools in these labs that she was studying at all. Like, this is when before she started at these labs. So these tools have just not been used. Now, AI automation, as it is today, is the promise of like being a game changer, you know, and especially in medical settings. It's going to reduce diagnosis times, will spot things, it'll lower costs. But they're all on the shelf, and nobody wants to use them. They had literally built shelfware continuously. And more than that, they were looking in the wrong place to answer the question, why does this keep happening? Or as Diana said, you know, they are genuinely concerned, but they don't seem to understand that it's them that's causing the difficulties. So she asked the question, you know, if physicians need these systems so much, then why don't they use them? Now, the problem is that these systems weren't seen as useful. So either the researchers weren't building the right systems or not building the systems right. So Diana spent a lot of time trying to figure out why this was. So instead of examining their own mistakes, they blamed the users. They called them naive, computer phobic. It was an end user problem. It was not a problem with the tools themselves, they believed, because these systems work fine if you just know how to use them. Now, Diana pointed out to them that instead of blaming the users, that they should realize the problem was with the systems themselves, not the people that were using them. This was dismissed. So Diana noted that the researchers assumed that the issue was user acceptance rather than unusable systems. So the systems were often judged to be successful without considering if the real-life users found them useful. So they would just give it a big tick once it was out the door. It's built, it's done, it's working, it's a success. So one science even claimed usefulness is not quantifiable. So you can use that in your next team meeting. So feedback was rarely sought, and the users weren't observed using the systems. There was a massive lack of curiosity, which I can't get my head around, to be honest, about why these tools, you know, weren't being used, and that they weren't like seen in real life context and things like that. And it's kind of like they deleted the social realities of work, in my opinion. So recall how I said like the majority of the data gathered, and pardon the pun, rather clinically, by a knowledge expert and an expert. Well, they rarely ever actually stepped into a clinical setting as well. So when she asked whether a designer had actually visited a hospital to find out, what's that kind of system we're going to build, this was the response. Ooh, I can't stand the sight of blood. I'm not going there. So how the clinicians actually did their job was not part of the design process. They weren't interested in that. And it was almost unheard of for, as I say, an AI design team to go in and observe real-life places in the workplace, what they were building for. And again, the information they had to build these systems was that one expert, sometimes a textbook. Sometimes they would just pull information out of textbooks and say, that's an AI system built for you there, go try and use it. And obviously nobody did. Humans, as I say, are not like computer programs, but neither is the world of work. Work isn't linear. If you were to ask how you explain your day job, you're going to either miss stuff, and there's going to be loads of steps as well. And there's also workarounds. So recall, this group can't even understand their own day jobs. They don't even recognize all this as part of their day jobs. So how are they going to imagine someone else's work? How are they going to imagine someone else's day that they've not even seen if they don't even recognize their own work? Now, these systems don't account for the tactic knowledge or even, the workarounds I mentioned. And the reality of life, they are not built into the system. There is no complexity of human real-life situations built in here. So as a result, this is their term, this is the AI researchers' term, knowledge falls off a cliff. And it's a term they use to describe when knowledge had hit its limits, when they face the situations where the information they'd gathered doesn't carry on, and then it stops the machine from working the way they expected it to. Pretty much like technical limitations to a system, except more data-driven. So when an example of this is when they were building a system, one of the systems said, oh, this person has got an infection, except that this person was a male person and the infection they were referring to was something that only pregnant women get. So if they'd failed to kind of put into the system that, yeah, men don't tend to get pregnant. So, and just like little tiny things like that would just make these systems just fall flat when they're in use. So you had to, if you were one of those few people earlier that were actually using these systems, you had to also manipulate the systems to kind of get it to do what you want, to conform to the internal reality of how these systems were kind of codified and built. So not your reality, someone else's. And we kind of live through this now when we're trying to jailbreak stuff in AI. Like, yes, swear at me, AI. So we try and break it that way. So Diana's conclusion to all this is, yes, these knowledge engineers have the power to pick and choose who deserves to be in the knowledge base, but in doing so, they've unintentionally contributed to the fragility of these systems by focusing too much on the ideal ideal scenarios in which these systems are going to be used. They chose not to recognize the human, and if they were anthropologists, they would know this, but there is no typical human, so you can't design for the typical human. And as such, it deviated from the ideal. So the AI's worldview of what is real work doing AI meant that their beliefs and assumptions were built into these build processes. And to get out of this loop that, they kept building crappy systems that nobody wanted to use, to get out of this, that would require a lot of introspection. And after reading this book very many times now, I really love it. Granted, it's only one source, but in all honesty, I believe that these scientists do not have room in their ego to have that kind of introspection. And as a result, they limited the potential of these AI tools. But who else were they deleting? So the lab wasn't just full of men, there were women working there. So in the 80s and 90s, women made up about 8% of the academic computer science profession. Today, that number is 15%. Yay, progress. Women in the lab were often treated as other in this very male-oriented field, and it still goes on today. I did a podcast recently, and I was introduced as Lianne Potter, female cybersecurity expert. And I said, do you say that about your male cybersecurity experts? It sounds a bit weird, doesn't it? Needless to say, that wasn't included in the final cut. So Diana observed that these women in the labs were seen as second-class citizens. They simply did not count the way that men did. They had to conform, be one of the boys, and they often faced a lot of teasing and a lot of sexual harassment. Now, there's one scenario, what she describes in the book, about how one male lab worker changed all the screensavers in the lab to images of scantily clad women, and then when challenged by Diana that it might make an uncomfortable workplace this, he said, women can't take a joke and they're far too serious about gender. And then she told her about another incident in the book where one female worker went on to log in and there was a file on her desktop. She clicked on it and it was just the When Harry Met Sally orgasm scene on loop, could not close it. And she just sat there in silence. And then all the other women gathered around and watched too, stood there in silence and said, yeah, it's just male territory. That's just the price of working in the computer science lab. So when Diana highlighted this gender divide to her male lab workers, they often denied it or dismissed it and said, yeah, you've just been overly sensitive. And the interesting thing about their approach to this was because they said, science is objective, science is culture-free, and science, therefore, means it is gender neutral. Ergo, I'm a scientist and I can't be sexist. Yeah, right. So, we've surely made some progress, right? It's been like nearly 40 years since this book came out, and talking about these awful situations these women put in these labs. We recognize a significant contribution of women, don't we, nowadays? Well, here's a snippet that really hit home. So this is Diana talking about gender initiatives, probably back in the 90s, I think, from what I can glean from the book. So, public efforts to increase the proportion of women in computer science is often treated as a pipeline issue. Anyone recognize pipeline issue? Right, but the idea is, we get more young girls in and women, That'll solve the problem, right? Ah, yeah. There are already women working in this field. Shouldn't we make it nicer for people? Just for context, pipeline, getting girls to pursue tech, yeah, culture. Still a conversation we're having today. How disappointing is it to have this conversation still today? But more than that, it's dangerous. Nothing much has changed. And with this AI technology that's moving so fast, we don't have the luxury to wait another 40 years. You can't wait for me to bring out, the updated version of this before we start changing stuff. We need to act now. Diana tragically passed away in 1997 during a hiking accident. We are definitely poorer for not hearing her insights today. I think it would be fantastic to hear what she thinks about AI landscape today. I'm sure she would have a lot to say. We need anthropologists to help AI researchers who will focus solely on data in a theoretical, codifiable way. By immersing ourselves in AI development and environments, anthropologists can provide crucial insights into the social, cultural, and ethical dimensions of the work we're doing in this space, because this approach builds the gap between the technical aspects of AI and the human experience and prevent future harms. It also never hurts to have an outsider's perspective. Now, Diana said in her book, "As an outsider, I have a different perspective on the source of this problem. Medical information systems are not being accepted because they do not meet the needs of consumers, and that the difficulty in turn results from the way the problem formulation, system design, system building, and evaluation are understood and carried out in medical informatics." What I take away from Diana's work is the main problem of user acceptance was that those creating the AI systems value the technology more than the people using it. Let's not keep making that mistake. We stand at a crossroads, we really do. We need to learn from the pioneers of the 80s and 90s of AI research. We need to embrace AI technology with the human in mind. Otherwise, we risk not only AI harms and poor alignment, but also a lot of shelfware that nobody wants to use. Now, I'm hoping in sharing her insights today that you're keen to get a book for yourself. I'm not sponsored or anything. I think it's essential reading, and I actually think it deserves a second edition. This came out in 2001, I believe. It's well needed for an update. So I'm going to do a post on LinkedIn, so please follow me, and I'm going to tag in the publisher, and I'm going to say, let's get a second edition out there. I also want to thank very, very deeply Diana's widow, Bern, who has flown all the way from San Francisco to hear this tribute. No pressure, right? Your memories and encouragement meant so much to me on this project. It's a project I've absolutely loved. It's a passion project for sure, and it's meant everything to me. But it's not just Bern that I've had the opportunity to meet from Diana's descendants. I was doing an AI safety course and posted about this wonderful conference to invite people. And yeah, someone else got in touch and said, "Hey, that's my auntie," which I was like, small world. And it's so great to see her continuing. She's a software developer by trade, continuing the AI tradition there. Now, I actually had a call with her, and I said to her, you're a person working in tech. I didn't say you're a woman working in tech, you're a person working in tech. And you're witnessing this AI revolution, and you've just read her book. What do you think about Diana's work that is still relevant today? Now, she said, and it was quite profound, the hypocrisy is that most AI is built by the male AI tech elite. They're the ones telling us how dangerous AI is, and they're the ones building it. The real danger now isn't AI itself, but it's the people with the power to build it. Now, Diana's work, as I said, her mission in this book was to speak truth to power. I've tried to do a little bit today. Now it's your turn. Thank you so much, everyone.